Hello, I'm Michele Borba. I'm an educational psychologist, I'm a writer, but I'm also a parent. And that's why I know that every one of you is always wondering the single most important question: what do I do to help my child be the most successful and happy he or she can be, not only now, but the rest of their life? And I am convinced that the answer is make sure you're cultivating empathy. Now, what is empathy? It's this incredible capacity, human capacity, that our kids are already born with. They're hardwired for it. It's the ability to feel with another person. It sounds kind of soft and fluffy, but New research says if we cultivate this particular trait, it gives our children an immense advantage the rest of their lives. It's going to help them, first of all, be happier and more resilient, which is clearly what we need. But we also know that this child is going to be mentally happier, less stressed, more employable, better engaged in a classroom. And the best thing is, we can cultivate it, but the bad news is it's slipping downwards. This trait that Harvard says is the top employability factor right now in the 21st century is going downwards as a trend. In fact, University of Michigan has been tracking incoming college freshmen for really over 30 years. And what they've discovered is something dismal. And that is, per decade, our kids' empathy levels are going downwards. In fact, in 40 years, it's decreased almost at a level of 40%. And at the same time, narcissism, I'm better than you, has gone up 58%. That's when we should all worry as parents, because it means as narcissism goes up, empathy is clearly out of our children's picture, because empathy is all about we, it's all about helping another. Self-absorption kills empathy. So my little trek has been to try to figure out if it's so important and our kids are hardwired for it and it's going down, what can we do to take it up? And the first thing is it's doable. It's not another program. It's not a fancy tutor. It's just simple little intentional things we do and weave in to our everyday parenting practices. In fact, what I now discover is that empathy is made up of 9 habits. 9 habits. So here's your womb to tomb scenario of raising the happy, healthy kid to be the best of their life. It starts with emotional literacy. They got to be able to tune in and look and observe somebody and how they're feeling. But it also has moral identity. The child knows who they are, what your family stands for, so they're more likely to step in and do the right thing. Perspective taking. They're able to see from another point of view. They're able to get into somebody else's shoes. Moral imagination. They can journey into another world. Maybe it's through a film, maybe it's through a book, but they're using that technique. Another point is self-regulation. That's what we're worried about, because you see, as stress builds, our kids' empathy levels also go down because they're dialing it down. They need to be able to cope. 1 out of 3 American kids is now stressed. Stressed to the max. That was prior to a pandemic. But we're also looking at some other things. The more they practice kindness, the better. The more they actually step in and be able to figure out that it's a we world and they can learn to collaborate, that's going to help them now, but the rest of their lives. 2 other little points. Moral courage is where we're finally aiming for. So the child does step in and does speak out and does do the right thing until finally they have that trait that we all hope that they graduate with. Yeah, smart here, but also smart here. They're an altruistic leader. My next quest was to try to figure out if this thing says science is culpable and we can really do make a difference, then what's it look like? And I began to fly the world and I discovered something. Yeah, there's fabulous lesson plans for it, but the best strategies I've ever learned came from kids. Kids were the ones who always told me, here's the best way to teach empathy. And the first lesson was way far north in Fort McMurray. Now, it's up in Canada, and I walked into a classroom because the superintendent said, you've got to get into that 3rd grade class. They're doing something absolutely profound in terms of teaching emotional literacy. Remember, you first have to be able to go, oh, she looks sad, or he sounds frustrated, or look how he's standing, I think he's stressed. The more our children text, the more they look down, the lower their emotional literacy scores are going. And emotional literacy is the gateway to empathy, so I'm in that 3rd grade class to try to figure out what are they doing that superintendent says is so unique. All the kids, 3rd graders, precious group, were sitting around a great big green rug, and they were so eager. They told me, shh, come on in, sit down. They were very inclusive because they were waiting for their teacher. Then they gave me some very strict directions for the rules in the class. As soon as the teacher comes in, just keep smiling. Don't look sad. I said, what'll happen if I look sad? Oh, she'll cry. Don't look sad. Now I'm a little worried. And the other kid goes and sit real straight. Just sit real straight and don't startle, because she startles real easily. I am wondering what is with this teacher, but the kids seem to really enjoy her. The door opens, in walks the teacher. She sits in the middle of the green rug, and for the next 30 minutes, I'm spellbound. Because what I'm watching is the most profound way to teach emotional literacy that we can all use and copy. You see, the teacher that day was an 8-month-old baby named Clara. Clara, the baby, comes in once a month. The kids say that's our baby. They've actually kind of adopted her for the year. The real teacher, the adult, was just waiting for a mom to bring the baby. But what they're doing with the baby is learning emotional literacy. The baby sits in the middle of the green rug, and the first question from the teacher is, how does Clara seem to feel today? And oh, the kids, they're zeroing in. Oh, she looks frustrated, says one kid. How do you know? Because her whole body's like this. I think she looks stressed, says another child. The teacher goes, well, how do you know? Well, her hands are like this. And then one little guy said, I think she's going to cry. How do you know she's going to cry? Because her whole body looks like she's going to cry. What are we going to do? And on the spot, one little guy said, everybody sit real still. Everybody put a smile on your face, and everybody starts swaying. And we're all going to sing a lullaby. For the next minute, I'm sitting there swaying, because the kids are knocking me, make sure that I'm swaying. We're all smiling. And it doesn't miss a beat, because you see, Clara seems to pick it up. She starts to smile, and the little guy next to me goes, see, Clara's learning empathy. Now, that alone was pretty amazing to me in that moment, because I realized it wasn't just Clara that was learning empathy. It was the kids in that classroom. The next thing I asked Mr. Verbal over here, who told me that she was learning empathy, is I said, why does this work? And the third grader said, the first most important thing we all need to remember as parents. It works, they said, he said, because empathy is a verb. Now, when I asked, and what does that mean? I had an inkling, but to hear it from a third grader, he said, well, you don't learn it from a worksheet. It's not like a word of the month. You got to see it and feel it, and we're seeing it and feeling it from Clara. There you go. There's the textbook moment, and there's the scientific moment. We can cultivate empathy in our children, but the first thing we've got to do is give them real moments to do so. Now, certainly you could use a baby, but there's other possibilities. You have a puppy at home? Puppies are a gold mine. How does Fido feel today? How do you know he's happy? Yeah, his tail is wagging. What else could you do? I've had parents say that they've had their kids babysit the kid next door. Watch her. Watch the 4-year-old, and you'll know when she's really getting tired. FaceTime grandma, but prime the children as you're FaceTiming grandma. Watch her face and listen to her voice, and you'll know when she needs to say goodbye because she's getting tired. The more our children text, the lower their emotional literacy scores go. And it's one reason that empathy is taking a dip. Empathy is a verb, but here's some other things to keep in mind. Be intentional about it. Just find natural ways to weave it in. You can watch the movie Inside Out. You can take moments to say, how do you think Dad's going to feel when he comes home after that day? Look at his face to see if you're right. Emotional literacy is step one, but there's some other things that our kids need. First, let's make sure that it's real, it's meaningful, and we can find dozens of ways to do so. But watch carefully, because we know something about empathy as it goes down. Loneliness goes up. You know that UCLA has been tracking incoming college freshman parents? They've been doing so for 30 years as well. This last year's crop, prior to a pandemic, was the loneliest they'd ever seen. Said they're great, they're very smart, their SAT scores are over the top, but they don't know how to connect with one another. What we want is our kids to have real, meaningful opportunities to connect. That's step one. Make it a verb. But step two is our kids need a caring mindset. You see, Nancy Eisenberg is a wonderful researcher, and she's told us that children act how they see themselves to be. Now, we're so quick to always ask what you get when our kids come home. But sometimes we need to always ask instead, what kind thing did you do? Because if your children see themselves as a kind, caring kid, they're more likely to engage in kind, caring actions. You want a simple way to know how to do it? Here's a dad, and here's his son. His name is Josh. He lives way far north in Nova Scotia. And when he was in middle school, Josh was bullied. Josh was having some real problems, and that was he wasn't feeling too good about going to school. But his dad would always tell him, remember, Josh, you're a kind kid. Just keep being kind. And then something very tragic happened to this kid. And that is his dad was diagnosed with cancer. It was incurable. And his last and final words to Josh was instilling again that caring mindset. Josh, he said, you got to promise me. You are a kind kid. Please, please don't ever stop being the kind-hearted kid you are, because that's you, Josh. Dad passed away. Josh goes through a little bit of depression. Mom thought the best idea at this point is to move him. And so Josh and Mom moved to a new school, big high school, doesn't know anybody. The bullying again started. But once again, Josh decided to listen to his dad. He said, you know, he kept telling me I got to be a kind kid. So I said, Josh, what did you do? What did you do? He said, well, I decided to be the doorman. I said, you what? He said, I decided to be the doorman. I wasn't going to go down the level to where they were, those kids who were bullying me. I was just going to stand at the door every day and greet the kids when they walked in with a, hi, how are you? I said, how'd that go? He said, not too well at the beginning, because behavior never changes overnight. But he said, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm just going to be, hi, how are you? And he said some interesting things started to happen. The first interesting thing started to happen was that some of the kids actually started to say hi and hello you back. The next interesting thing happened was that I was absent one day, and a lot of kids told me that they missed me. The next interesting thing happened is that the principal said, Josh, you're doing something here. The whole school is changing. And then what happened around homecoming time? They nominated me and made me homecoming king, but they really meant it. The most amazing thing happened, though, Dr. Borba. I said, what would that be, Josh? He said, well, I graduated. But the kids gave me the best graduation present you could possibly imagine. They took the door off the hinges. All the kids in the whole school signed it, sent it to Josh and said, this is what you deserve, Josh. You've told us the most important thing. Be kind, be caring. But it was all instilled because Josh had a caring mindset. Instill in your child who they are, not just what they are doing. Who are you? Take a moment as a family and maybe come up with a family mantra. That's real easy. Just have your kids come home one day with marking pens and chart paper over the floor and just say, what do we want to be remembered for as a family? Have them vote, just vote for all kinds of terms or write all of the terms. And then when you have all different ones like kind and caring and smart and brave or whatever, choose as a family the single most important one that you all agree upon. One family did that. They become the caring Perlins. I asked Marilyn, the daughter, how'd you remember it? She said, it was real easy. My mom must have said it 50 times a day. Remember, we're the caring Perlins. She'd drop us off at school. Remember, we're the caring Perlins. Kids act how they see themselves to be. What happened is all of the family Perlins adopted that mantra. We're the caring Perlins. Their mindset, their behavior went. And as a result, what happens is empathy increased. Other ideas? Here's another one. We know a lot about empathy. We know that it can be cultivated. We know there's lots of little things that you can do at home to help your children feel better about themselves, but also become more resilient. Empathy is one of those traits. It also reduces the stress. But right now, we're also dealing with an issue. And that is some very fascinating studies from NYU said the kind of images our children view, either on film, it could be on a text, it could be the news. After a while, those images either increase our empathy or diminish it. And if we keep looking at all the doom and gloom in the world, what happens is our children actually develop what's called a mean world syndrome. They don't see the world as kind and caring and good, so they're not inspired to be kind and caring and good, and empathy fatigue sets in. What do? I think what we do is go back to one of the best and the best in this country who raised my own children, and that was Fred Rogers. I remember sitting every day in front of a TV with my 3 sons, listening to Fred Rogers, and he'd give my kids the most wonderful advice. The best advice, particularly if there was ever a tragedy. He'd always say, look for the helpers, not the bad guys. Look for the helpers because they're always there. And that's the advice we need to tell our children. Right now and any time, if there's any moment of uncertainty, if there's any kind of a tragedy, look for the helpers, because that's the good news. Institute good news reports in your own home. Go to the back page of the newspapers and cut out those incredible stories. They're there about real children who were so inspiring and so wonderful, who are making such a difference in the world. Some parents every night at the dinner hour, they talk about one child. Or right before your child goes to sleep, remind them of one more child. It'll inspire your child. One story that I love, always true. Find ideally a story about your children's age and then tell it to them. I've been sharing one story for, oh my gosh, 10 years. And I always share it with middle school kids because it's about two middle school boys. You see, it was Ian and Ryan, and they're best friends in the whole wide world. And so it wasn't any surprise that when Ian O'Gora was diagnosed with cancer, the first person to his bed who never left his bed was his buddy Ryan. Ryan had immense, wonderful emotional literacy abilities. He could read Ian and he'd know that he was feeling upset. But he also had this wonderful way to say, what can I do? What can I do for you? What are you worried about? And Ian opened up. He felt trusted with his friend. And he said, well, I know I have cancer and that's kind of scary, but the doctor says I'm probably going to live. Well, that's good, says Ryan. What are you worried about? Well, I'm going to have to go through a lot of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is not going to feel good, but doctor says it's going to make me feel better and I'm probably going to live as a result of it. Well, that's good. What are you worried about? And Ian said, well, I'm not worried about the chemotherapy or the cancer. I'm worried about going back to school. Why? Said his friend. Because I'm worried that the other kids are going to make fun of me. You see, when you have chemotherapy, you lose all your hair. I'm going to be the only bald kid, and all the kids are going to laugh at me. No, they're not, said Ryan. No, they're not, said Mr. Empathetic Ryan. He said, because if you lose your hair, I'm losing my hair. I'm shaving it so we be bald together. Now, he placated his friend. He gave him that empathy piece that helped him feel better, but he didn't stop, because what Ryan did that night was to go home. And by 4:30, every kid in that classroom, boys, were told to get to the local barber shop. They nicknamed themselves the Bald Eagles. By 5 o'clock, each one of those boys had shaved their head. Teacher showed up, he shaved his head, and I think they get an A+ for empathy, because what they actually did was change the culture of their school. I met their teacher. He said, it was Ryan who changed us all. Ryan who reminded us to stick up for one another and help our friend. Ian's doing fine, but the message is, help your kids find the helpers in the world. Make them feel better about who they are. Give them inspiring stories, and those will all make a difference. And those are the kids called the Bald Eagles who were showing us how. There's one more thing, though. The empathy is we, not me. We have become such a competitive society that we pit kids against each other. We're really worried about, what did she get? What did he get? We label our children. Be careful, because top 21st century skill right now, says Fortune 500 companies and the World Economic Summit, is the ability to get along and collaborate together. When I look at what's the best way to teach we, not me, I found it. And I found it by chance because I kept hearing about a gentleman whose name is John Wallach, and I think he's an absolute visionary. John Wallach was an AP Wire reporter that I think has told us something very important about kids, their needs, and how to teach empathy. You see, he was always covering the Middle East Accords in Washington, D.C., and one day he had his enough moment. He said, the adults are never going to get along. He said, our problem is we're spending all our time and energy on trying to get the adults to get along. Let's get the kids to figure out how to get along. And I think he's got something there that's really right. But now what does he do? Is he decides to form a camp, a beautiful place in Otisville, Maine, right on the lake. And he's going to invite some kids to come to that camp to teach them the power of we. Now, here's the part that's interesting. His whole vision was to create a camp where you bring kids in who have leadership skills, but maybe lacking something called empathy, the skills of empathy, because empathy is made up of skills. And hopefully, he said, if we can instill skills in kids then, like at 14 to 16 years of age, maybe they'll become a seed, like a seed of peace. So when they grow up, they want to become an elected official. Now, here's the point when you go, what's the big deal about the camp? The big deal about the camp is where the children are coming from. So get into their shoes for a minute. Teachers in the world each year around June time choose kids who they think are clear leaders. So these kids come in from, hold on, Palestine, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, United States. They arrive late at night and they don't know anybody. Texts, cell phones, they're not allowed. And it's kind of scary. The reason it's scary is that their entire life they've been taught to hate the other side. Now you're spending 3 weeks with the other side who is supposedly your archenemy. How do you dissipate the hate? How do you open up a child's heart? I think it's a lesson for adults as well as kids. The Seeds of Peace camp uses empathy. And I know that because I spent a day almost at the end of when the camp was over, 3 weeks, and interviewed all the kids. And every single kid there said, this place changes you. It's impossible to leave with not being changed from the inside out. And I said, why does it change you? What makes it work? Every kid said, it makes work because it's all based on empathy. I said, well, what did they do so that you have more empathy? They use the verb. They use the we to me stuff like that. Here's some points. Number one, all the kids are put into cabins, but they mix you up. You don't sleep with the same nation. You sleep with strangers. So when I asked a kid from Palestine how you do that, all the kids said, well, you don't sleep for 2.5 weeks. I said, why? Because there's a kid from Israel over the top of you and you figure you're dead the following morning. Because that's what your mother has told you your whole life. How do you get rid of the hate that's so embedded? You keep going. You eat with a different side. You canoe with a different side. You do archery with a different side. But they also encourage you to do one thing, and that is make a friend with one kid from the other side. Now, the one thing that is clear is that there are extraordinary, we're talking extraordinary, caring counselors. You can't go anywhere without a caring parent, a caring teacher, a caring counselor. They care desperately about children and they're tuned into them. University of Chicago, when you ask, how do you know this thing works, has been tracking these kids for 30 years. When you are required to make one friend from the other side and you got 3 weeks to do it and you have real meaningful verb kind of opportunities to do so, what begins to happen slowly is the hate goes down and your heart starts to go up. Every place on every tree, though, that I viewed also had a sign, just a cardboard sign that was nailed to the tree, and it said, stop and talk. I think those signs should be in our schools, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, because empathy all starts with step down, look up, look at the color of the talker's eyes, and hear them, listen to them. That's the beginning of it all. They also teach kids every single day how to dialogue, how to handle disagreements. And about 2.5 weeks later, every child told me, 2.5 weeks is when the change starts to happen. I said, and what is the change? Your heart starts to open up. One kid said, all of a sudden, you see the kid who you distrusted, you hated, you begin to see, one kid said, that your enemy has a face. And you begin to see that you have something in common with the other person. That's the power of empathy. I think that's the one thing the world needs more than anything else. I left that camp in tears knowing there's hope. They've proven that it works. But the motto of the camp is my favorite because on one window pane right under it was just a carved piece of wood. And the camp motto was the way life could be. I think that's where we're at. It's helping children learn habits of we. It's helping children learn that empathy is a verb. It's helping children learn that you have a commonality with the person. Don't look for the difference. Look for what you have in common. But there's one other point that I think is the piece we also need to remember. When we look at all the research on what is another way that we parents can make a difference on a child's life, it's helping them do good or giving back as opposed to getting. We've become very materialistic and we give. It's interesting that we look at science says of just economic basis of who has the lower empathy, the wealthier. And very often what we discover is as wealth goes up, empathy goes down because you start relying on things as opposed to people. And so this last piece I learned in the most special place in the whole world. I learned that you got to start with one. And it was when I was in Rwanda. Now, I was there on a goodwill mission because genocide had decimated a country. In 100 days, millions were killed. Neighbor killing neighbor. Empathy had gone down to absolute zero level. But now I'm in an orphanage for deaf-mute children. I am doing something that was pretty fun. I was there, first of all, to give backpacks that were packed by your kids from Minnesota. So I carried the backpacks with some others. We're in the orphanage. We're giving out the backpacks. And what's in the backpack? Well, each child in Minnesota had just packed them with fun little things, and it was pretty simple. There was like maybe a stick of gum, and there was a ruler, a little notepad, or just a piece of candy, and a handwritten note, a note from the child. So I'm giving all the backpacks out, and oh, the kids are just absolutely so excited. They're all orphans because their grandparents had been slaughtered. Many of their own parents were in such trauma or had died themselves. And they were also deaf-mute. So they're so ravishing, these backpacks, so excited, the elation. Until I started to look, and I'll never forget it, over to the corner of the room. There was one little kid, and he looked not happy, but upset. He was going and going and going through the backpack, and obviously he couldn't find what he was looking for. Was there the ruler missing? The notebook? What is it that he needed so much? I was ready to go get him another stick of gum, until I finally discovered, no, from it all, the one thing that child was looking for was the handwritten note from the child back in Minnesota, who he had never met. I, at that point, am standing at the back of the child who is taking the note up. And the first thing I notice is he holds the note and then puts it to his heart. Then he looks at me. I'm a basket case. I'm just sobbing my way through. He looks at my tears and he signs the word heart, puts it back to his own chest. And then he holds the note out and I'm reading it. And it's so simple. It just says, hi, my name is, Johnny. I live in Minnesota. I looked up Kigali, where you live, and I packed this for you. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you. Have a good day. That child, that's all he was looking for. That's all he needed, to know that somebody cared about him. That's what every child needs, just to feel a belongingness, a sense of love, a sense of trust. But I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I wish that Johnny had seen the impact of his gesture. Because what we now know is one of the greatest ways to transform our children's lives, to help them see themselves as a person of worth, is have them give something to another child or another adult, not to the masses, but to one. Very often we rob kids of that opportunity by not letting them give the coat or give the blanket. But every child I've ever interviewed always said it was the look in that person's eye that I gave that coat to. Oh my gosh, he got a little teary-eyed. He told me thank you. I knew I'd made a difference on him, and I just had to do more. It starts with one. It starts with one caring connection. Empathy is made up of 9 habits. They're 9 simple habits. Research says these are the ones that will transform our children's lives. Help them see themselves as people of goodness, of strength, who can become contributing members of our society, and that's what we're looking for. This is not an overnight process. This is an ongoing venture. This is what parenting is all about, where you find simple little ways to look at those 9 habits and say, which one do my child have? Which one does my child lack? They're all part of a book called Unselfie that has each chapter one of those 9 habits. But don't go overwhelming yourself trying to do all 300 ideas in them. Find one that your child needs, one, and keep going until your child can do it without you. When we look at empathy, I think it is the antidote to hate. It's the best hope we have for a civilization. It's the glue, the social glue that holds us all together and makes us strong. It's unraveling. It's going down. It's at a level of 40% drop in 30 years. Well, narcissism, better than you, is up 58%. We have a job to do. We have serious work to do. Because seriously, this may be the single most important venture of our life, to help our kids become good smart people. When you look at it, don't get overwhelmed. Just think of 5 simple things. Make it a verb. Think of that baby. Make it a verb. Make it the action. The second thing is, don't overlook praise and kindness. Help your child develop a caring mindset so he sees himself as a good person. Share goodness. Share the good news of the world so kids are inspired to realize the world really is a good place. The humanity is still strong. The compassion is still there. Practice we, not me. Stretch your kids. Get those chutes and ladders boards out. Get Monopoly boards out. Teach kids how to encourage one another. Work together as a team. But always start with one. If we start with one and we do those 5, we keep together as a pack of parents, what we'll do, I think, is do the most important thing to raise up a next generation of children who are strong in heart as well as mind. And I think that's the answer that our kids need above all else. That's what's going to make a strong, healthy society that's going to help our kids the rest of our lives. Thank you.